YouTube. We'll be doing a new series of videos with VMware Cloud Foundation, and let's get started. We're going to get into what VMware Cloud Builder is. As you guys can see, this is an appliance that is configured by VMware that allows you to bring up a Cloud Foundation environment. Let's log in. So what happens here is when you get a spreadsheet from Cloud Builder, you actually pre-configure all your information, which I will show a screenshot of the spreadsheet here in this video. But once you actually import and consume the spreadsheet and validate all your configurations to your proper ESXi hosts, proper FQDNs, proper A records, DNS, IP subnetting, you get to build a full Cloud Foundation environment. So there's a lot of different tasks. So we have things from validating SSH thumbprints, making sure that SSH is the thumbprints from SHA-256, also the elliptic curve DCSA thumbprints will also be verified during this, making sure that's the right host. Also during this process we have certificates that get created by VMware vCenter CA. This SSH keys get imported, and during the setup we have the host getting prepared. So you want to make sure you have an ESXi host that is clean, configured, and ready for vSAN. It will go through a few steps. It will prep the host, and during this environment there will be few configurations that get temporarily created on your ESXi host. If you actually log into an ESXi host and watch it, you can actually see some temporary interfaces get spun up and some ping tests go through. And once everything goes successful, they get removed so the deployment can go. Create a vCenter cluster. So here we're making sure that once the hosts are deployed and vCenter is configured, it's going to start creating a vSphere cluster. It's going to create the licenses for vSAN, and you have to input your licenses on your spreadsheet, which you saw earlier. It goes through all its DRS, distributed resource scheduler, it does update manager, it does many things. Management cluster configures it, making sure that your vMotion, vSAN, all your VM kernel NICs are configured, right VLANs, everything is based off of the Cloud Builder spreadsheet as well. And then also enables vSAN at this point. Post configuration, a few other things. As you guys can see, there's a lot of different tasks that I'm going through. Another big one is VMware NSX-T data center. It deploys, depending on the VMware Cloud version BOM, bill of materials. You can get NSX-T 3133, which is a part of VCF 441, and during this demo, this is what I'll be showing. But yeah, it creates NSX-T, pairs up with your top-of-rack routers, creates all the certificates, prepares the ESXi host, creates the overlays, creates the TEPs. So there's a lot of configuration we'll get into later. And then here it gets to deploy the SDDC manager. You guys will get to see this as well. Populate inventory of SDDC manager. Starts configuring all the objects, network identifiers, pools, and anything that's related to the Cloud Foundation. And then we'll go through these tasks so you guys can see them. Configures backup. So by default, NSX-T backs up to a NFS share on SDDC manager. So once you actually build your VCF environment, you need to stand up an SFTP server and configure your backups to that. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and we'll get into the environment. Now we are logged into the software-defined data center manager, also known as the SDDC manager. And this is a regular splash screen you get to see when you log in for the first time. You have Workload Management, which is also known as Tanzu, Kubernetes. Tanzu is the product where Kubernetes lives in. Create your containers, workload domains. You have your management, which runs the environment for your cloud foundation, and then you have your virtual infrastructure domain. And those are where your workload, compute, VDI, anything that's for your business use case. Host types, it'll tell you here if you have a hybrid host. So if you have a mixture of vSAN and local data storage or iSCSI or fiber channel, that's going to show up as a hybrid host. Primarily, VCF relies on vSAN. vSAN is the principal storage for VCF. So for you to have a fully automated, software-driven defined data center, it's a recommended version of 441 with using the proper bill of materials and installing with vSAN. That way it gives you the most robustness and ability to expand and configure your environment. Here we have some regular CPU, and you guys can see you can move these around. But CPU over the whole cluster, and this environment lives on that Dell PowerEdge R750 that you guys saw in previous videos. Really awesome server. Also, thanks again to Express Computer Systems. They helped me with a lot of great things, great service. I mean, best place to get your hardware needs. Memory, so you have allocated 800 gigabytes out of 1 terabyte out of that server. So I'm going to show you guys that here in a second. Top domains tells you what workload domains you guys have built by default. As you can see, you have my management domain, my virtual-based workload domain that I created, and yes, this does refresh, so this is live. So just, you guys saw that flicker, it's a refresh. And if you have an offline Cloud Foundation environment which is not connected to the internet, you will see that your bundles have to be uploaded manually. So just a heads up, and there's a whole process for that. Solution, this is where you enable Kubernetes workload management, and it redirects you to vCenter. So as you guys can see, once you select this, you begin. Select the option. We're going to send it on workload domain, which we don't have any configured objects yet. You have to add an edge cluster, which right now I do not have that configured, but later in this video we will have that. So we're going to close that out for now. Workload domains, as you guys can see, my management and all the services that are running within right now. We have vCenter and NSX-T. Any patches, so if there's any upgrades, you can do a pre-check. We'll let this run while it's happening. And any updates you've been done, they actually are tracked here. So the cool thing about VCF, it actually times your environments. So for example, a business case needs to say how long it takes to upgrade on a host. It's approximately 14 to 15 minutes, but you get to see that over here. Hosts tells you what hosts you have in your cluster, and if they're active or not, and the CPU usage and the storage. Clusters, this is the overall cluster that is based off of the vSphere cluster, and that's what that is. Edge clusters is for your NSX-T, and everything is still coming back up because I turned this environment on and off, so it'll be a few minutes before it comes up. So now we're on the password management portion. Under the security tab, you drill down to password management. VCF takes care of your passwords, rotations, scheduling rotations, making sure your environment's healthy. And if you need to figure out what that random password is, you can SSH into the ESXi host, like SSH into SDDC manager. So let's do this. Hit accept. you always want to log in as VCF. Once you're logged in, you type in lookup passwords, and this will tell you what product you want. Well, let's just say NSX-T. NSX-T Manager. Skip that, enter, and this is authenticating as the single sign-on. And there you go. It's just a lab environment, so it's just default hands-on lab password. So you guys can see when your password gets rotated, you can look it into here. Backup. So this is where you configure your SDDC manager backups and also configure your site settings. Primarily is if you're going to backup, you want to make sure it's a Linux server that has an offsite storage capability or some kind of tier 2 storage. So yeah, now we will go on to vCenter. So now let's take a look at vCenter. So vCenter gets actually all configured by SDDC Manager, which is a part of the whole build out. When you stand up a VMware Cloud Foundation environment, you get a lot of configurations which require day 0, day 1, and day 2 operation tasks. So as you guys can see, I have my 4-node vSAN cluster, and we also have a 3-node vSAN cluster. This does live on this ESXi host, which is the Dell PowerEdge R750. It has two 48 CPU logical. They're Intel Xeon Gold 6342, 2.8 gigahertz, and they are physically 24 cores per socket, 2 CPUs. But once you combine those two 48s, you get 96. So very powerful server. I have the whole environment running right now as it is. You're only using 48 gigahertz out of 134. I still have 86 free, so it's very powerful, and I still have a decent amount of RAM. Let's get back into it. So once you build up a VMware Cloud Foundation environment, get it all standard up, you also want to stand up your edge nodes, which are your on and off ramps from the overlay into the physical world. And we will get into that here in a second. As I have 2 edge nodes, I can put them in there just for organization, but my 2 edge nodes 3 and 4, I actually built them with SDDC Manager. These 2 I built with NSX-T. So now we are in NSX-T, and we're going to give you an overview of how networking is and how easy it is to troubleshoot, expand networks, create, grow, scale out. So as you guys can see, we have our tier 0 router. Our tier 0 is think of it as a provider level router. It is given from the infrastructure, it peers up to your top of rack, and you have an intra-transit link, which is your 100.64.64.0/31. This is a IP space that is actually automated by NSX-T. You can change this, but I would not recommend. I will let NSX-T take care of that. And your tier 1 gateway is your tenant as a consumer tenant of a environment is a tier 1, and you can do a lot of services at a tier 1 gateway. So if I click on it, we're going to go to tier 1 first. You guys had a lot of questions on how everything is set up. Here is some information on a tier 1. So a tier 1 can live without a tier 0. So if you want to keep a self-isolated environment, you can make a tier 1 gateway and have everything internally. You don't have to link it to a tier 0. You always need an edge cluster, which an edge cluster is an edge node. So you have to give an assignment to where this tier 1 is going to reside on. That's always critical, important to do. You can do failover, non-preemptive, or preemptive, which right now I have a non-preemptive because you can't have active on a tier 1. Only tier 0s can have that. You can do active standby based on your services you have for NSX-T. So once you create an tier 1, you actually have a few settings to do. So let's get creating one. We're going to create one. We're going to call it VB test segment. And we're going to link it to a tier 0 gateway, which I built originally. So once you link it, you always want to specify what edge cluster it's going to live on. We're going to put it on the same edge cluster which one is on. So you can make it preemptive, non-preemptive. I keep it by default. You can do standby relocation if you need to. You can change pool size for your load balancer if you need to make that. So once you actually have your name, your linking, and your edge cluster created, if you want to advertise it, you're going to want to advertise your connected ports and segments. And if you use VMware Cloud Foundation in Cloud Director and you want to actually create tenant environments, you want to make sure you have your NATed IPs and your static routes. If there's any other service you need, it's a toggle switch. It's very easy. But for this video, it's just demonstration. Once we do that, we have it created. I'm going to click No and go back to my topology, and you will see that I have created a VB test segment which has a tier 1 attached to tier 0. Now the cool thing is we can actually create an actual segment now, which is a layer 2 broadcast domain, and call it test for video. And I like always to put an IP space, so just 202 is fine. We're going to connect it to that tier 1 VB. You can actually put this environment on an overlay using Geneve, or you can actually consume a already pre-existing VLAN and do microsegmentation and firewalling IPS IDS at the physical VLAN. But for this video, we're going to do an overlay, and we're going to add an IP space. Okay, which at least falls into my routable IP space, so if I wanted to do anything with it, we can. Admin state up, kind of like on your Cisco switches, you have an admin. You can do shut, no shut, kill the service, connectivity, uplink teaming. So there's a lot of settings, and once we have it saved, you can go back into editing it, and you can do different security mechanisms or even profiles. You can do IP discovery, and you can create your own custom IP discovery, so you can do ARP snooping, you can disable it or enable it, ND snooping, ARP ND binding, trust on first use. So this is actually interesting. So anytime a VM turns on for the first time, it will trust on first use. But if you don't want it to trust on use, then you can just change that by creating a new custom profile, DHCP snooping, and things like that. So there's a lot of configurations you guys can do. So I'm going to close editing. We're going to go back to our network topology. As you can see, we have our test for video. Now we will actually take a virtual machine, which I have a domain controller, and we're going to add it to our network. So actually, before we do that, we're going to show you something. See that test for video? This test for video showed up because we have a full trust between our vCenter and NSX-T via compute managers. So NSX-T and vCenter are working together to propagate and create those overlay networks, which you'll see that show up in here. So now we can take this domain controller, edit, put it on test for video, click OK, OK, and you will see it switch right here for video. I will power it up, And it's not a domain controller yet. This is just a test dummy VM. So for now, we're gonna keep it as is. Okay, it's turning on. So now, if we do this, hit refresh. Look at that. We got a virtual machine. There is our domain controller, which is on this layer 2 segment, which is attached to this tier 1, which says tier 1 has an intra-transit link peered up to tier 0. So that's kind of neat. Now we will get into more overview of NSX-T services. You have VPN, so you can do VPN services, IPsec, layer 2 VPN, VPN client. You can do IPsec, policy based or route based. You can do layer 2 sessions, local endpoints. You can do EVPN, NATing, which is a very common used environment if you use VMware Cloud Director. Load balancing. So you have load balancers. You can create a software-driven load balancer. So we'll create one as a test. If I can type test small. We'll attach it to our tier 1 gateway. Hit save. For right now, get back to the topology, and you will see we have 2 services running right now. And there's a load balancer, and it's building it. It'll take a few minutes for it to come up. Forwarding policies. If you need to create any custom rules to forward from a virtual machine to an environment, or even to router out to the underlay, overlay, there's a lot of different policies you can do. DNS is services, so you can actually add a DNS service where you can have a virtual IP, all your infrastructure within the overlay, and anything that's like tenant level, you can actually create a DNS forward zone which looks up to your domain controllers. DHCP, so you can do DHCP on a layer 2 segment. So if you wanted to create a DHCP server, very easy, create DHCP. You can do a gateway, local, or a DHCP relay. Primarily I've done gateway DHCP, which is more common if you want to move your segment around. But if you do a local, then you actually have to make sure you remove the DHCP server before you can actually change your NSX-T segments to a different tier 1 or tier 0 router. So that is it for the overview of the video. We're going to get into more series of VMware Cloud Foundation, and yeah, stay tuned.